In a world where regulations grow more complex by the day, compliance alone is no longer enough. What organizations need today are RegTech solutions, powered by deep consulting expertise, to navigate complexity with confidence. Built on real-world consulting experience, Cygnus GRC Suite from the House of Crowe, one of the world's top 10 consulting firms, is a reliable RegTech solution that helps organizations navigate complexity with confidence. Cygnus Aura, transforming internal audits through intelligent automation. Cygnus Regulus, enabling regulatory audit readiness. Cygnus Nexus, proactive risk management for informed decision-making. Cygnus Vigilus, complete oversight through real-time transaction monitoring. Cygnus Scan, AML, and sanctions screening to prevent financial crime. Cygnus Vault, intelligent and secure regulatory document management. Cygnus Identia, smart KYC, and onboarding for seamless compliance. In today's regulatory landscape, compliance is not optional. With Cygnus GRC Suite, organizations stay compliant, resilient, and future-ready.
Okay, good morning, all of you, and thank you for joining this session. Myself, Manoj Pillai, Director of Marketing at Crowe. Before we start the session, let me give you a brief intro about our organization. Crowe UAE is a part of Crowe Global, which is one of the top 10 consulting firms in the world. We have presence in more than 140 countries. Crowe UAE started its operation in UAE in 1981 and completed more than 4 decades of service. We have 5 offices and more than 600 professionals are working under 12 service lines. We support clients from various industries like financial, insurance, real estate, health, hospitality, retail, manufacturing, oil and gas for audit, tax, and advisory services. This particular webinar is hosting by the GRC service line of Crowe UAE, which is supporting the clients to comply with various regulations introduced by the regulators like CBUAE, FSRA, VARA, DIFC, SCA, etc. through our GRC advisory, Crowe UAE Academy, internal audit, cyber threat management, and technology solutions. Now, I would like to introduce our speaker for this webinar. Mr. Pijush Das is the director of Crowe UAE Academy and a partner in the GRC advisory division at Crowe. He is a seasoned banking professional with more than 35 years of experience. In his career with the State Bank of India, where he led treasury and risk management functions across both domestic and international markets. He has also served as a senior lecturer at the Emirates Institute of Banking and Financial Studies, UAE. His professional credentials include CCM, CAMS, CFCS, and Sanctions Compliance Specialist certifications. With this, I'm handing over to Mr. Pijush to take you through the session. Once again, thank you so much for joining this one. Thank you. Over to Mr. Pijush Das. Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, warm welcome once again. But before we start, I'd like to take you through a session of 3 questions, a quiz, just to see, it's a training session evaluation. So I'll take you through this, then take you through the presentation. So here comes the short quiz, ladies and gentlemen. Yes. I hope you can see the screen. You can scan the QR code, join the quiz. It's a short 3 questions just to fire you up. Of course, we'll show the top participants. And we will start the quiz as soon as we have 100 participants. Great. I can see a lot of enthusiasm. Okay, so here we start the quiz. Who is a specially designated national or SDN? You'll have a minute to answer, all of you. And of course, the top 5 will show up. That will be a proud moment. Excellent. Almost 90 people have answered already. Okay, it's a person sanctioned by OFAC, USA, right? That's a specially designated national, SDN. Person sanctioned by USA are called SDNs. It could be an individual or a company or an organization, right? So Shyam, Ajmal, Hari, Amit, and Wishmi. What are targeted financial sanctions? Sanctions imposed by OFAC for human rights violation, sanctions imposed by UN Security Council for terrorism and proliferation, sanctions imposed by EU for financial crimes, sanctions imposed by UK for violation of laws. What are targeted financial sanctions? Excellent. Almost all of you have answered yes. And most of you have got it correct. Sanctions imposed by UN Security Council the world over are called targeted financial sanctions and for terrorism and proliferation. So Shyam again, Ajmal, Hari, Amit, and Ahmed Kalo. And the last question, ladies and gentlemen. Amazon was fined by OFAC in July 2020 for not flagging Yalta, Crimea for Yalta, Crimea with a C. Why did Amazon fail in its screening capabilities? For not screening locations, for lack of fuzzy matching capabilities, lack of human intervention, for concealment. Why was Amazon fined? Yes, the answer is lack of fuzzy matching capabilities. You see, the K and the C was the difference. Amazon systems did not have fuzzy matching cables. So it did not highlight Crimea, Yalta, Crimea for Yalta, the correct Simia. They had spelled themselves, and misspellings are a part of evasion, and you must be careful about it. So you must have matching capabilities. So, ladies and gentlemen, at the top, Sham, John, Kiran, Muhammad Jabir, and Gurmeet. Congrats to all of you, ladies and gentlemen. So let's now move over to our presentation. Here comes the presentation, ladies and gentlemen. So this is the sanction screening, the concept, the strategies, emerging tools, and my name is Pijush Das, and this is from the Crowe GRC advisory team and the technology team, the GRC team, governance, risk, and compliance team. So, ladies and gentlemen, what is sanction screening? You know, sanctions are prohibitions and restrictions which are non-military in nature. And we are supposed to, not do business with anyone that is sanctioned. So it is the process of checking individuals, companies, transactions against the sanctions list of prohibited parties so that we do not deal with criminals, terrorists, proliferators, or any entity connected with any of these criminal actors. So it's a compliance check. Can we do business with this person or organization? Who gets screened? Everyone that you deal with, customers, prospects, vendors, supplier, the entire supply chain, beneficial owners. This concept of beneficial owners is a very important concept that you need to understand. A person can be a beneficial owner, may not be listed as a shareholder. All transaction counterparty, PEPs, also relatives and close associates, vessels, aircraft, payments, everyone in the payments chain. What are the lists that you have to, worry about? OFAC, the SDN list, specially designated national list of USA, the EU consolidated list, the UN Security Council list, the UK list. FATF does not sanction individuals or entities, but they do publish a list of blacklisted countries, gray listed countries, which gets revised every quarter. So if your client is from a high-risk country, then you have to do enhanced due diligence. When should it be done? When screening should be done. So you have to do screening. And when should be done? When onboarding the clients. Periodic reviews. When you perform any transaction.
Sir, you're on mute.
You are mute. You are mute, please.
Sir, you're on mute.
Yes.
Yeah.
You have to keep on. The changes in the, sanctions list get changed. So you have to continually monitor your database against new lists, right? So that's something that you have to do. And of course, there could be events where you could have negative media and then new sanctions lists announced. You're aware of them. So you may have to do a screening. So continual screening, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, why sanctions exist? To combat terrorism and terrorist financing, stop proliferation activities. Proliferation is related to weapons of mass destruction, nuclear weapons, chemical weapons, and biological weapons, and also the delivery vehicles like drones and missiles. Also, dual use goods that can be used for proliferation as well as for peaceful purposes. Today, proliferators or criminals, they rarely buy full weapon system. They buy spare parts and they are dual use goods like semiconductors, etc. Also, training and know-how is a part of proliferation activities. Anyone abusing human rights to pressure authoritarian regimes, disrupt organized crime, drug trafficking, respond to geopolitical. That's why, countries. And of course, you're aware, the main sanctioning countries are USA, UK, the EU, and the United Nations. We worry about these sanctions because UN, all countries are part of UN. The other three countries is we cannot access their financial systems if we don't abide by the sanctions. What are the types of sanctions? Comprehensive sanction. Ladies and gentlemen, the whole country is sanctions, like North Korea, Cuba, Iran. Smart sanctions. Comprehensive sanctions is messy. So UK, EU, and the United Nations generally resort to smart sanctions. Individual entities, informal and formal organizations, ships and aircraft. Smart sanctions. Sectoral sanctions. The entire sector, for example, the Russian, and it started with Russia, the financial sector, the defense sector, the oil sector, where there are a lot of entities that have been sanctioned. And this is one area that you have to be careful because there may not be names, but if that entity or person belongs to that sector, that person is also sanctioned. Now, EU, UK, and USA impose primary sanctions. And what are primary sanctions? They are applicable for the nationals of those countries. They have to apply the sanctions. That means they cannot deal with individuals who are sanctioned, who are SDNs. What about foreigners? Normally, foreigners can deal with such people. But there's another variety, primary sanctions with nexus. If it is a primary sanctions with nexus, so I repeat, primary sanctions for citizens or connected individuals from the sanctioning countries. But what is primary sanctions with nexus? People, even foreigners, cannot deal in US dollars with a SDN, a person sanctioned by USA, because you are ultimately making a US bank violate sanctions. So nexus is you can't deal with anybody, a sanctioned person. Foreigners cannot deal with a sanctioned person in US dollars, pound sterling, or euros, or any goods manufactured in these countries. That is nexus, a relationship. Secondary sanctions are imposed only by USA. What are secondary sanctions? Secondary sanctions, it could be some primary sanctions persons who are designated as secondary sanctions, and that means foreigners cannot deal with such individuals. Like I want to give you Iran Insurance. It is subject to secondary sanctions. However, now there's a new variety of secondary sanction, anyone dealing with a secondary sanction, violating sanctions of USA, etc., are threatened with secondary sanctions. So that is secondary sanctions. And what is so very important that you must realize, secondary sanctions give the sanctioning authorities, especially USA, extraterritorial, rights, which can be questioned. However, it exists. Economic sanctions are related to trade. Financial sanctions deal with, asset freeze, etc. Financial instruments. Now, a very important part of sanctions are the narrative sanctions. Don't let me scare you. 95% of sanctioned persons are not on any list, right? And that's where the newer versions of sanction screening come in, and I'll talk about it later. 95% of persons who are sanctioned are not on the list. So how do you identify them? And that's the purpose of my discussion. Narrative sanctions. And how do they come about? If a sanctioned person owns 50% or more of a company, that company, even if it's not listed, is also sanctioned. So this is where the complexity of sanctions comes in. Narrative sanctions. Who are the regulated entities in UAE? Commercial banks, retail banks, non-banking financial companies, fund management companies, casinos, gold dealers, investment banks, brokers, fintech companies, payment service providers, crypto exchanges, import-export businesses, law firms, accountancy firms, real estate companies, luxury good dealers or high-value dealers are, regulated only in ADGM, not in the mainland. Now, people who are sanctioned will evade sanctions, will try to get around sanctions. For example, Iran is not able to transact in dollars. They have started transacting in cryptos. That's one. Use of cryptos. So they manipulate their names. Like you saw Yalta, Crimea with a K, right? Which the correct name is C with a Crimea. So they manipulate, misspell their names deliberately, hoping that, entities will not have fuzzy matching capabilities. Shell companies, they create companies and in jurisdiction that the owner does not need to be named. Front companies, companies fronting for, sanctioned individuals. Correspondent banking abuse. There are some. Correspondent banking is a method of, using the banking system in other countries. Now, in certain jurisdictions, you can open, accounts. You're not allowed to use a correspondent bank in America. Don't worry. Open with a client bank in other countries and use that bank to make transfers. So correspondent banking abuse, trade-based sanctions evasion. And this is a big topic, use of international trade to evade sanctions. And there are many ways to do it. Like use shell companies, front companies to do trade. Cryptocurrencies are being used for evading sanctions like Iran does. Third-party intermediaries do transactions in the name of third parties. Flags of convenience use Iranian ships to use the Panama flag, the Marshall Islands flag, commingling funds, complex ownership structure, hoping the sanctioned entities will not be detected, swift message stripping, For example, a bank like BNP Paribas was fined because they used to remove sanctioned individuals from the names of the SWIFT messages. Nominee shareholders nominate someone close to a sanctioned person as the beneficial owner of a company. Marine and shipping deception, and this includes ship to ship transfers, switching off the automatic information signal which is used to track ships, use of third party jurisdiction. This is, for example, if Russia wants to import goods, they cannot import directly. So they get it through Belarus. The goods go to Belarus and they're diverted to Russia. So this is how sanctions evasion. These are the various methods, and there are many more. So why sanction screening matters more than ever? Because the sanctions lists are going on increasing because of geopolitical escalation. And huge fines are being imposed by countries like USA, UK, and you must have seen in the videos that we put forward earlier. So global sanctions, the intensity of the sanctions are increasing. Governments are using sanctions as a weapon against countries, entities, sectors, individuals. Thousands of designations were added because of the Russian-Ukraine sanctions. Situation in the Gulf, Red Sea disruptions, current blockages in the Strait of Hormuz. And obviously, with technology, if you can use AI, sanctioned persons also can use AI to evade sanctions. So sanction screening has become highly critical if you want to, comply with the regulations. So this screening ensures your organization stays fully compliant with international and local UAE regulations, those set by the central bank and other supervisory authorities. So what are the challenges in sanctions? What are the challenges in sanctions? Ladies and gentlemen, the rapidly sanctions regime, ever-changing new designations, fragmented global regimes, USA, UK, EU might have their own sanctions regimes. Name variation, evasion, right? You misspell the names deliberately. Data not being structured properly. People using aliases. Shell companies, use of cryptos. Many people don't have the kind of resources that is necessary. It is quite intensive, and you must have qualified people doing sanction screening. Technology debt or technical debt. Now, what is technical debt? Many people, and this is a very important area that you must care about. Technical debt is using simple, easy to use, or you're trying to low cost technology options because you want to comply. But what it causes is, because you don't have effective technology, it builds up cost. There is interest to be paid, technology debt, because if you use low cost, ordinary systems and do not use the systems that are really necessary, it costs a debt. It causes a debt for the future because you can be charged with heavy penalties and you have to pay an interest. That is technology debt. So remember, don't go for cheap systems that are not really effective for screening. data quality, technology gaps. Your data quality may not be proper. You may not be, screening the data or putting in right data. Technology gaps, lack of fuzzy matching. What is fuzzy matching? Fuzzy matching is the spellings may be different, but they are pronounced similarly. Like, I'll give you a simple example. John and John. They're spelled differently, but they are the one and the same person. So fuzzy matching catches these. Also, I gave you an example of Crimea with a K and Crimea with a C. Because they didn't have fuzzy matching, they fail. Inadequate training. So these are the challenges to proper screening. So what are the best practices and proven strategies? Ladies and gentlemen, one, you have to adopt a risk-based approach. Now, what is a risk-based approach? A risk-based approach is doing a risk evaluation of your entities and identifying the higher risk areas, adopting higher controls or more intensive controls for the higher risk areas, allocating more resources to the higher risk areas. This, in effect, is the risk-based approach. How does it refer to the sanction screening? Well, you have to do more intensive screening by manipulating names for high-risk entities. Change the name. For example, we have Prem Nair. As our sanctioned individuals say, you have to say P. Nair, Prem N, and so on. You have to manipulate the names, right? So this is what is the risk-based approach. When you have a high risk, so segment customers by risk profile. So anyone from a high-risk jurisdiction, you have to do more intensive screening. Industry is high risk. If there's a PEP link, you have to do more intensive screening. And second part of risk-based approaches, maybe keep lower thresholds. Is something that you can think about. You have to have a risk appetite statement as to who are the intolerable risk. You can't deal with them. Who are the tolerable risk but subject to high enhanced due diligence, right? So you have to look at these things. Continuous and ongoing screening. You cannot let down your guard. Continuously, ensure that you have been compliant. You ensure that any new person, you have the systems, that any new person is designated, you have him on your radar. So continuous ongoing stream and comprehensive real-time data. Get all the updated lists and update with adverse media, UBO data. Now, remember I told you, narrative sanctions, 95% of sanctioned persons, and that includes individuals and companies who are sanctioned, and many of them are not listed, 95. So you have to supplement with adverse media, PEP, UBO data. You have to get daily, hourly list updated, not just manual. By the way, one of the advantages is that you are updated with the list, but you could always, download the list because all lists are available, but you will be doing yourself a disservice because the faster you get the list, the faster you're able to do delta screening, faster you are able to report, take action, freezing funds, right? The vendor service level agreements should also talk about the service level objectives, how fast you're able to include the names. What is the latency in including names? Optimize matching logic, fuzzy logic algorithms to handle name variations, aliases. You have to also look at date of birth. Sometimes there could be similar names. So how do you handle the false positives? Date of birth, nationality, address, these help you to find out which are the false positive. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, using this date of birth, you can build thresholds in the sanction screening portfolio. But one problem with this, if you keep the threshold very high, then you get less. The biggest problem in sanction screening, 95% of the alerts may be false positives. So what do? Reduce false positive, keep the thresholds high. That means if the person, when I say threshold, what do I mean? When the percentage match between your customer and the named individual, sanctioned individual, is above a threshold, then you take it up for alert management. You look into the alert. So that's one of them. Keep it high so you don't get too many alerts. But that is not effective. It's possible you might miss out a genuine alert. So what do? You have to reduce the threshold. And if you reduce the threshold, then you will have to handle a lot of false positive. So between handling too many false positive, reducing false, you have to balance it. That is where testing, validation comes in. And that is something that you need to do. One way is whitelisting. What is whitelisting? You might have a list of some good names who do come up in the sanction screening alerts, but they are your clients and you have known them for many years. And so you could have a white list of names which you did not look into the alerts. Of course, there are many rules about this. Ladies and gentlemen, so these are some best practices. Governance framework. There must be an owner for the sanction screening, somebody who's accountable and responsible. You must have a MLRO, sanctions officer, with sufficient accountability. You must have testing and validation of your sanction screening system. And you must report to the board continually. Board must have oversight whether your sanction screening systems are effective at detecting possible cases of sanctioned individuals, right? So your board must have a, feeling that you have a good system in place. And remember, ladies and gentlemen, compliance is about documentation, documentation, documentation. You may be wrong, but please document everything. For example, one of the areas that you will be documenting is why you have said some alert is a false positive. What is your justification? You must record everything. And there will be a maker checker. Somebody will approve this justification. Please, and very important, ladies and gentlemen, some people, what do? To reduce the cost, they take one user ID. And many people use this. Now, that would not be pinpoint to accountability. For every user, you must have a separate user ID. That is very important. You must ensure this. Regulators will expect you to identify people who have taken the decisions. Otherwise, you might be in for trouble. Invest in staff training, regular updates, scenario training, how people evade sanctions. You have to look into all these, ladies and gentlemen. Continuous tuning. And what is tuning? I told you, balance, you know, uh, efficiency with effectiveness. That's called tuning. I told you that if you keep the threshold very high, a threshold is the extent of match, percentage name match. If you keep the percentage very high, you'll have less false positive, but you might miss out on sanctioned individuals not being caught in the net. So you have to reduce it, and you have to continually, periodically tune your system so that your screening systems are effective. Ladies and gentlemen, key takeaways: sanctions exposure is only growing. Record designations, expanding scope like sectoral sanctions. New sectors are being sanctioned. Secondary sanctions, severe penalties. Now secondary sanctions, anyone dealing with a sanctioned person, technically primary sanctions, only citizens from the sanctioned countries need to abide by the sanctions. But today, the sanctioning authorities are threatening foreigners for dealing with sanctions. That is secondary sanctions. And that is an area that is really scary. So you must be careful. You could be, your customer could be involved in secondary sanctions. Not because the name is there, because they deal with sanctioned individuals. So you have to be careful about this. Adopt the risk-based approach. Segment customers, prioritize screening intensity, like I told you, manipulated screening. And also, the rule-based systems are, failing to, in 90% of the cases, they are not able to identify. False positive rates, are draining resources. So you must reduce false positives. So therefore, you have to, embed artificial intelligence, machine learning. They are no longer optional. You have to use contextual analysis, because AI can say, what is the context? And they can look into all the sources and identify the context and alert you to the possibility of sanctions. Entity resolution, I told you, one of the most important rules, I told you about the 50% rule. If a SDN owns 50% of another company, that entity, even if it's not listed, is also sanctioned. And I'll give you a little case. Say Mr. A owns 50% of ABC. So ABC is sanctioned. But ABC owns 50% of PQR. PQR is also sanctioned. PQR owns 50% of XYZ. XYZ is also sanctioned. Now, XYZ, PQR may not be listed. So who can tell you this? Perhaps AI, because they do a network analysis. They could identify and alert you to the possibility of sanctions. This is where AI and machine learning can make a big difference in your sanction screening. Ladies and gentlemen, the 4 pillars of sanction screening: data ingestion and enrichment. You must get high quality data and prepare the data, ensure the data is input correctly. And where do you get the data? KYC profiles, sanctions lists, PEP databases, adverse media, right? And you must do contextual linking. You must use the artificial intelligence and natural language processing systems. Second is advanced matching, smart comparison. You know, uh, normally, there would be exact name matching, but that doesn't happen nowadays. So you must go into fuzzy matching, transliteration. They are translated, not literally translated. Cultural variation in names. Some of the algorithms, of course, we don't have the time for getting into the algorithms. Edit distance, Levenstein edit distance, phonetic matching, contextual checks. These are some algorithms that are already there in the systems, right? You can, if you are knowledgeable, you can check with your vendors whether they have all the algorithms in the system and how to handle alerts, right? Potential issues, look at the AI models, the rules that are embedded in the system. Triggers are unusual patterns, high risk jurisdiction, watch list hits. And remember, when you handle false positives, use the risk based approach all the time. And investigation is very important. And all the people who are part of the must be fully documented, they must be named. Analyst review, case management, context of the CDD gathering, who took the decisions, escalation, freezing, SAR filing. Why SAR filing comes in here? Technically, if a person is sanctioned by OFAC, you as a foreigner can deal with that person. But you have a responsibility. You have to file SAR against, if it's sanctioned by OFAC. Your customer is sanctioned by OFAC. You have to file an SAR. However, in targeted financial sanctions, if there is an exact match, you have to freeze the funds, right? And you have to report as confirmed name matching. And this has to be sent on GoML to EOCN, which is the competent authority for targeted financial sanctions. So, ladies and gentlemen, then versus now. Traditional scanning, you name, company, vessel, are sanctioned against various lists. You do a simple name matching or a fuzzy name matching. And if you don't have fuzzy name matching, you may be in for trouble. And this does not take care of the layered ownership. I told you about the 50% rule. I want to repeat this again. If Mr. A and SDN owns 50% of ABC sanction. If ABC owns 50% of PQR is also sanctioned. And if PQR owns 50% of XYZ, XY. Technically, A owns only maybe 12% of XYZ, but under the induction rule, all these are sanctioned. So you have to get in all these, right? So the traditional sanctioning systems are reactive, not predictive. Now you have more holistic with AI and machine learning, network-aware, risk-based detection. You can identify beneficial ownership, those, inducted, 50% rule. Supply chain diversion rule. Sometimes people, sanctioned individual, divert the exports through areas where they may not be caught. But AI will catch it because they do contextual mapping. Maritime, shadow fleet activity, and also crypto enables and DeFi flows. AI is able to catch wallets which are linked to sanctioned individual.
Sir, you are on mute.
Again.
Okay. ZSEX and ZCOF, they are registered in the UK, but they are linked to Iranian entities. And they were sanctioned. And this was caught by AI, of course, because they were indulgent activities for the benefit of Iranian authorities.
Sir, again you are on mute.
More and more Russian and Iranian authorities are resorting to crypto. Okay. Just 1 minute. So, what are the new detection techniques using? You can find out the layered ownership. You can map ownership graphs through shell companies, trust, special purpose vehicles, nominees, right? You can go beyond the 50. Control is also about lacking ownership. It's possible that the sanctioned individuals don't own the entities, but they could be controlling. So AI will bring in all those cases of perhaps control without ownership, right? That's very important. Maritime shadow fleet, sometimes people, ships, automatic information signals are radio signals which track the movement of ships. So if somebody wants to visit a sanctioned port, they will switch off the AI. And what do they claim? The weather is bad. Therefore, the AIS was not working, right? So that's how they try to circumvent sanctions. They go dark, and sometimes they do ship to ship transfers. Now, all this will be caught by AI, right? These cases. You may not be identified these may not come on your screen. Supply chain diversion. For example, I mentioned to you, sometimes you want to export to Russia. Today, although the lot of sanctions imposed, Russia continues to do business with all its previous supplies. So how do they do it? They're sent to Belarus, they're sent to Kyrgyzstan. OFAC has identified which other countries. I believe even in UAE, goods are diverted to Russia from UAE, right? So please be careful that you do not deal with such companies which are indulging in these practices, right? So supply chain, it goes to Belarus, from Belarus, it goes to Russia. And crypto-enabled flows, wallet clustering, the AI can identify wallets. Cryptos are stored in wallets. Wallets, connected wallets could be identified as crypto. They could, one of the favorite ways of, hiding or concealment in cryptos is use of mixer. When two people exchange, their transactions are mixed up with many other, and there are professional mixers, so you won't know from where the money came from, where it went, which money went where. So it's possible a person, money from cryptos from a sanctioned person may have gone to your entity, but you are not able to detect it. AI can detect that, right? Cross-chain monitoring between different currencies, right? These are things that, for example, you can go move from cryptos to XRP, privacy coins, and these are ways of concealment. And AI can catch all this, ladies and gentlemen. Now, why all this matters? Because regulators want you to be up to date. Use technology that is more relevant with the evolving crimes. False positive, false negatives. Now, very important, ladies and gentlemen, you know what is a false positive. False positive is there is a match, but the match is not a correct match. The more dangerous cousin is a false negative. What's a false negative? A false negative is basically something which though did not show up as an alert, but is actually is a sanctioned person. It should have been alerted, right? Something that did not show up as an alert, but should have been shown up as an alert. That's a false negative. And this is something that, because, ladies, why this matters? Because today criminals, sanctioned persons are using AI to evade sanctions, and it could be part of the false negative. And it is an operational reality, ladies and gentlemen. Institutions trade heavy or crypto exposed region, Middle East, Europe, Asia. You must invest in AI, graph analytics, blockchain tools, right? Get maritime data feeds, enriched data. And this evolution is connected to advanced matching, data in all the pillars that I talked about, right? And investigation depth. So advanced matching, data quality, alert generation, handling alert, and investigating alerts. It matters. All this AI matters. Screening is about understanding the full ecosystem of risk. Not just, is this a name of the list? Does this customer transaction vessel flow connect indirectly or directly to sanctioned individuals? Are they trying to evade sanction? Is something that you must. So remember, ladies and gentlemen, data ingestion, advanced matching with smart logic, detection of alerts, investigating, taking the decision, and everything should be documented. 4 pillars, 1 mission to detect sanctioned individuals, report sanctioned individuals, and finally to eliminate financial crime. That is our objective. 1 mission. Protect your institution and the financial system. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm done. Now, do you have any questions that I can answer, ladies and gentlemen? Okay, there are some questions in the chat box. Yes, Luza Fernanda, you will get certificates. Okay, network is not stable. Noted. It could be, our network, your network. So it could be both related to that. Okay, but we'll check on that. Okay, how to screen sectoral sanction? Sectoral sanctions, is basically the sector is sanctioned. So any entity, even if not named, is on the sanctions. And obviously, one, you have to do a lot of, whether analysis, whether that sector is sanctioned, and therefore, is it a name in that sector? Which sector does it belong to? And AI can do that very well because they do contextual screening. So I hope I've answered your question, Mustafa. Otherwise, you have to do your own analysis, like the 50% rule. Okay. Okay. If there is a partial name match report, the rule is you have to, this is targeted sanctions, targeted financial sanctions. The rule is you have to suspend the transaction. Please remember, you have to suspend the transaction and report, right? And only when you get a response and or you're sure it is not a confirmed match, that's when you can do. You have to do your analysis. You cannot continue with the transaction for a PNMR transaction. I hope I've answered your question, Pijush. Abdul Samid, sanctions function more as tools of economic style than instrument of global justice. Your view? Okay. Now, that's something, for example, extraterritorial sanctions could, be something that you may not like, you may not approve. But the fact is that you have to use the financial systems of USA, UK. And if you don't abide by the sanctions, you cannot use the financial system, which may be harmful to your business. So you have to abide by the sanctions. I hope I've answered you, Abdul Samid. Okay, what are the AI tools? The tools are supervised learning, unsupervised learning, machine learning tools, natural language processing, deep learning. These are the tools that, the exact names of the brands, I'm not aware, and I can tell you if you want, but these are the tools that you use. Okay, so Akhil PM asks, what if a supplier has a negative media match? Now, this will depend upon your risk appetite. What kind of negative media? For example, is it related to fraud? Right? It may not be sanctioned, but it is related to fraud. So would your company like to deal with a fraudulent entity? Is a part of your risk appetite statement. So your risk appetite should tell you whether you should deal with such a person or not deal. Negative media, for example, I can tell you, certain sanctioned countries will also give some negative media, pass unnecessary remarks against certain individuals they don't like. But you have to decide whether that is a part of your risk appetite. So your risk appetite is very important. Okay. Dilhan Azad. I hope I've answered your question, Akhil. What is sectoral, secondary, and comprehensive sanction? Comprehensive sanctions is the whole country is sanctioned and you can't deal with that. Sectoral sanction, like Russia, certain sectors are completely sanctioned. For example, the finance sector, anyone in the finance sector of Russia, you cannot deal with it, or there are restrictions on investment. So you have to look at the type of sanctions. For example, you can't invest in more than 90 days, bonds of certain sectors. So you must look at the sanction. Certain sectors are sanctioned. And secondary sanctions is a very, very difficult cup of tea. For example, secondary sanctions are two parts. As I said, first part is certain SDNs, it's only issued by USA. Certain SDNs have a designation of secondary. They are subject to primary sanction. Primary sanctions, only citizens of sanctioned countries cannot deal with the sanctioned individuals. But if a primary sanctioned person, like Iran insurance, is also subject to secondary sanction, that means foreigners can also deal with that Iran insurance. That's number one. Today, Secondary sanctions has taken on a different coloring. USA threatens countries which are dealing with sanctioned persons with secondary sanction. That means if you deal with a primary sanctioned person, although you are allowed to, we will still fine you, designate you, right? Many countries, for example, one of the countries is India, right? Many Indian companies are being subject to secondary sanctions. Many UAE companies which have dealt with Iran are subject to have been designated under secondary sanctions. So that is secondary sanctions. Comprehensive sanctions, stoppage of all activity with, say, North Korea or Cuba is secondary sanctions. Comprehensive sanctions. Okay, here's a quick question. If there is a positive match for an individual with crime record, but no judgment has been issued, can be considered as not a trade-based sanction, proceed with the EDD. As I said, no crime record, no judgment has been issued. Can you continue? It'll be a part of your risk appetite. If you think that, sometimes false allegations are charged, people are charged. So if, in your opinion, if it's a part of your risk appetite, you can decide to go ahead, right? So it is a part of your risk appetite. I hope I've answered you, Dilhan Azad.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you for your answer.
right. Luza Fernanda says, adverse media is very important, super important, she says. But in my opinion, most of the people do not know how to execute the search. Okay, Crowe is here to help you, ladies and gentlemen, to tell you how. Okay, Munir, different threshold alert duration can be applied for different sanctions watcher list. Yes, you are the boss. You can apply different thresholds, right? For different lists if you want, right? You can talk to your technology vendor. I think you can use it. I think that is the risk-based approach, certainly. Okay, Fatima Rizwana, as a compliance professional, how should one handle a situation where a potential sanction match is identified, but the customer is a close friend or associate of the company's founder? There are no friends, relatives in sanctions. That means, please understand, if somebody is a potential match, friends or relatives do not matter. You have to, unless you want to be fined, you have to disassociate yourself with such a transaction. Potential sanctions, you're confident it's a potential sanction, then you have to dissociate. No friends, relatives will work here. I hope I'm very clear on this. No friend, relatives will work. No friend of the CEO, etc., will work. I hope you got my point, Miss Fatima. Luisa Fernanda, OFAC can issue permission to deal with any subject to them. Yes. OFAC can give licenses. They do two licenses. One is the general license, where everybody can use, but you can also apply to OFAC, seek permission, give reasons why you want to deal with a sanctioned person. You can do that. Yes, correct. Correct. You're right. How we know I'm a friend of Kim Jong, leader of North Korea? You do not know. You know, what you have to do is, Fernanda, you have to do a reasonable analysis and document everything. Document everything. That you are not able to find any links, document everything. That says a good evidence of your this thing. See, it is a risk-based approach, Fernanda. And risk-based approach, I want to focus on, it's not a zero tolerance approach. That means it's not that you can't make mistakes. You can make mistakes. But document everything. Document everything. That's the most important part of compliance. So when you do sanction screening, alert, investigation, please document all your findings. You know, sometimes that you have heard that somebody is a friend of the North Korean leader, record it. However, there is no merit, and you have done your analysis, there is no merit to that allegation. Record it. And therefore, you have to decide to continue with the business. Record it, right? Take the decision. It shows that you are. Okay. See, the source of fund documentation is related to anti-money laundering, right? Okay. Since you have asked me, Nageshwaran is my friend. I know him. Hi, Nageshwaran. How are you? Now, I want to tell you. Okay. Sorry. This was an earlier question. And this was asked by Vishnu Bose. What if a client is not providing source of information? Now, see, the rule is, if you have not completed your CDD, don't do business with the client. However, for the source of fund documentation, if you do media search and you're satisfied about the source of fund, then you can continue the business and you can record that. Should TFS, Munir, should the TFS freeze prohibition measures apply to the funds available in payroll cards? Any association with, targeted financial sanction, you have to handle it. Okay. In case where malicious actors use AI to alter names or transaction data to evade sanctions filters, how can institutions strengthen fuzzy matching, thresholds, alert review process to prevent such bypass? Mr. Nageshwaran, okay, I want to tell you this. Use AI to fight AI, right? That's the only way. And always human intervention is very important, right? So use AI to, AI is able to do contextual mapping, network analysis. These are tools that show connections. You have to do a reasonable listening. As I said, risk-based approach is not a zero tolerance approach. Do the best you can, document everything. Why you have decided to continue or not continue, how you have analyzed this, right? So you have to do this. Nageshwaran, is that okay? Okay, whether AML and related. I didn't understand your question, Akshar Modi. Whether AML and related compliance interlink with bank transaction and FTA. Okay, so what you're saying is, will your AML status affect your bank transactions? Sometimes bank also see the quality of your compliance program. And they might decide that your compliance program is not up to the mark, and they may decide not to deal with you. So have a good compliance program in place. Okay, Luza, yours is only a remark, so I won't answer that question. From your experience, what is one common mistakes organizations make in sanctions compliance? And I told you, Fatima, narrative sanctions. 95% of the sanctioned persons are not on any list, right? So you have to gear up to this fact. Recognize that you have to do screening, no doubt about it. But how will you be helped? Of course, use AI, because AI can find out layered ownership cases, right? You could, so that's the same. Otherwise, you have to do, proper analysis. I hope you got it, Fatima. You have to do proper analysis. And I can give you a lot of cases. So Gurmeet Singh, what if a company name is matching with slight difference, but UBO structure is totally different and not matching? Now, in such cases, right, what should you do, right? Do an analysis, record your observations. Record your observations. Why you decided to say that these are different companies. Record it. And that is enough. That is a very important part of compliance, right? You can do this. I hope, Gurmeet, you have understood me. If you have further questions, you can always ask me. Okay, I have some other questions which I want to. Are leasing and property management companies in the UAE required to screen tenants? Now, targeted financial sanctions is applicable to everyone. Leasing and property management companies are also under the regulatory umbrella. They have to do it. How is screening system linked to payment transactions? Payment transaction is about the entire supply chain. The IBAN numbers of the banks connected, the locations, all these are connected. The entire supply chain on the payment system, beneficiaries, originators, intermediaries, banks involved, subsidiary banks involved, all are connected. You have to screen all of them. How to become an AML compliance from accounts background, and what kind of certification or license is needed. So, gentlemen, they say that you must have these qualified, fit for the purpose. Fit for the purpose, you have to have good knowledge. Certified, you must have a proper designation, like ACANS, CFCS, right? And Crowe also has a certified anti-money laundering professional. You could take any of these, which is CPD certified. I like to hear certain topics regarding UAE revised AML CFT framework. What are the measures to be taken for the ongoing geopolitical issues in the Gulf countries? We recently held a webinar on the new AML CFT law, the executive law, to give you the strategic implications of the law. We earlier did on the UAE AML CFT law. And the second issue is about further measures to be taken for the ongoing geopolitical issues. Further designations, you must be glued to your, information system to find further designations, any changes. For example, USA has allowed, some companies and countries to, buy oil from sanctioned companies, right? So there are some changes that have happened. New designations, right? So you have to take care of that. If we want to reduce false positive without affecting any true positive for delta period dual use screening, what do we do? As I said, you have to keep testing. Like, for example, you have to adjust the thresholds and you have to continue to test it, right? So this is a continual process that you have to do. What are the key differences between traditional screening and newer AI-driven? So, ladies and gentlemen, the new AI-driven systems, what do? They do better name matching because they do contextual name matching. They also reduce the number of, by almost 50%, I'm told, 50% name matching, false positives are reduced, and they do smarter risk classification. They use supervised learning, unsupervised learning, natural language processing, deep learning, right? So you have to, that is the major difference. And especially in cryptos, they do better. Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you have any queries further, you can send it to us later. And I want to thank all of you to give me a patient hearing, and your questions have been great.